He castrated a boy, dressed him as a bride, and called him his wife. This wasn't madness. This was Rome under Nero. You're walking through ancient Rome in 67 AD when you see something that makes your blood run cold. Emperor Nero strolls through the forum with what appears to be his stunning young wife, draped in silk and jewels, but whispers follow in their wake because everyone knows the horrifying truth. That woman beside the most powerful man in the world was once a boy named Sporus, and what Nero did to him represents one of the most disturbing acts of psychological and physical abuse in recorded history. This isn't just another tale of Roman excess. It's the story of how absolute power transformed love into obsession, grief into madness, and a human being into a living doll created to serve one man's twisted fantasy. Nero wasn't born evil. When he ascended to the throne at just 16, many Romans believed they were witnessing the dawn of a golden age. He reduced taxes, funded public entertainment, and performed in theatrical productions that delighted common people. But absolute power corrupts even the most promising souls. And by 65 AD, something had fundamentally broken inside the emperor's mind. Maybe it was the constant paranoia of knowing everyone wanted his position. Maybe it was the isolation of being the only person in an empire of 60 million who could never be contradicted. Or maybe it was what happened to the one person he claimed to love more than life itself. Her name was Poppaea Sabina, and she was everything Nero thought he wanted. Beautiful, intelligent, and ambitious enough to share his dreams of glory. When Nero first saw her, he was already married to Octavia in a cold, loveless political marriage. Poppaea represented everything Octavia was not. Vivacious where Octavia was reserved, commanding where Octavia avoided attention. The affair began as typical Roman scandal, but quickly evolved into genuine obsession. Nero wasn't just attracted to Poppaea's beauty, he was consumed by her. He would fly into murderous rages if other men looked at her too long. He stationed guards around her constantly, and lavished her with gifts that bankrupted the imperial treasury. Even marriage couldn't satisfy Nero's need to possess Poppaea completely. He isolated her from family and friends, commissioned dozens of portraits for his private chambers, and would spend hours watching her daily activities. This wasn't romantic devotion, it was surveillance. Then came the tragedy that shattered Nero's mind. During a violent quarrel in 65 AD, Nero kicked Poppaea while she was pregnant. She died within hours, taking with her the unborn child who might have been his heir. Nero threw himself on Poppaea's body, begging her forgiveness and commanding her to live, as if his imperial authority extended over death itself. He summoned Rome's best physicians, offering fortunes to save her life, threatening torture if they failed. But it was too late. The grief that followed was a complete break with reality. Nero refused to have Poppaea's body burned according to Roman custom. Instead, he had it embalmed and placed in an elaborate tomb. He declared her divine, established a cult in her honor, and spent days talking to her corpse as if she could still hear him. The imperial court now had to navigate an even more treacherous landscape. Courtiers were expected to participate in the fiction that Poppaea was somehow still alive, referring to her in present tense. Anyone who suggested the emperor should move on was immediately exiled or worse. It was during this period that Sporus first entered Nero's line of sight. Sporus was probably around 14 or 15, born into slavery in the imperial household and freed as a child. What made Sporus special wasn't his intelligence, it was his face. Multiple ancient sources agree that he bore an uncanny resemblance to dead Poppaea, particularly around the eyes and delicate bone structure. The first time Nero saw Sporus after Poppaea's death, something clicked in the emperor's broken mind. Here was a chance to undo the irreversible, to bring back what he had destroyed. The resemblance was so striking that for a moment, Nero may have actually believed he was seeing Poppaea's spirit returned in a new form. Of course, there was one obvious problem. Sporus was male. But for a man who had convinced himself he was a god, who had spent months talking to a corpse, changing someone's gender seemed like a minor obstacle. What happened next represents one of the most calculated acts of cruelty in human history. Nero didn't just decide to force Sporus to dress as a woman. He decided to make the transformation permanent. The emperor summoned Rome's best physicians and ordered them to perform surgery on the young man purely to make him appear more feminine. This wasn't just mutilation, it was systematic destruction of Sporus's identity as a human being. The procedure was dangerous, painful, and irreversible, often resulting in death from infection or blood loss. Even if Sporus survived, he would be forever changed physically,
emotionally, and socially. He would never father children, never experience normal relationships, never even be considered fully male by Roman society. Once Sporus recovered, Nero announced something that shocked even jaded Roman aristocrats. He was going to marry the young man in a full imperial wedding ceremony. The preparations took months and consumed enormous resources. Sporus was given a new name, Sabina, after the dead empress, and moved to special quarters where he could be prepared for his new role. Imperial seamstresses created gowns that would flatter his modified physique. Master jewelers crafted ornaments, incorporating gems that had once belonged to Poppaea herself. These weren't just accessories. They were tangible links to the dead woman, physical reminders of the person Sporus was being forced to replace. The wedding took place in spring 67 AD, in the largest palace hall. Musicians played traditional wedding songs, while servants offered the finest wines. To outside observers, it might have looked like a normal imperial wedding, but those in the know understood they were witnessing something unprecedented and disturbing. Following the wedding, Nero treated Sporus exactly as he would a legitimate empress. The young man received his own household staff and quarters within the palace complex. But all this apparent luxury came with a terrible price: complete erasure of his original identity and constant performance of a psychologically devastating role. Sporus was expected to accompany Nero to public functions and play the devoted wife in all interactions. Nero genuinely seemed to believe he had successfully resurrected Poppaea. He would call Sporus by his dead wife's name, reminisce about shared memories that had never happened, and expect responses maintaining the elaborate fiction. For over 2 years, Sporus lived this bizarre existence. Every morning he woke in rooms decorated to remind him of a dead woman he'd never met. Every conversation required pretending to be someone else, having memories that weren't his own. Ancient sources describe Sporus as becoming increasingly skilled at this deception, but also note he grew more withdrawn and melancholic as time passed, though he continued playing his assigned role perfectly in public. By 68 AD, Nero's excesses had pushed the Roman establishment too far. Rebellions broke out across the empire. When Nero fled Rome, Sporus was among his supporters. When enemies closed in, Nero chose death over capture. But his suicide left Sporus vulnerable as a visible symbol of Nero's reign. Sporus became a political pawn, passed from one powerful man to another, first Nymphidius Sabinus, then Otho, then Vitellius, each keeping him dressed as a woman. Under Vitellius, Sporus's nightmare reached its conclusion. The new emperor decided to use him for public entertainment in the Colosseum, in violent mythological reenactments. Rather than submit to this final degradation, Sporus took his own life, probably by poison in 69 AD. He was probably no more than 20 years old. In death, Sporus finally escaped the grotesque theater that had consumed his life. Perhaps most tragically, we know almost nothing about who Sporus was before his transformation. All of that was erased when he became Nero's living doll. In choosing his own death, Sporus reclaimed the one thing denied him: the power to make his own choice. His story reminds us that behind every historical narrative of imperial grandeur, there are individual human stories of suffering that deserve our attention, even across 2,000 years. If this shocked you, smash that like button and subscribe for more dark history. Comment below, which disturbing historical figure should we explore next? Hit the bell for notifications. Thanks for watching.